Good evening. My name's Ray Fritz. I'm the lead pastor here at Connections Church, and I want to thank you for making this place your home here tonight. We have been through a journey the last month here at our church in which we've been tracing the steps of Jesus to the cross, and we've called it One More Step Closer to the Cross. And this weekend, that journey culminates in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And to continue that journey with us, I've got a special guest speaker here tonight, and his name is Adam Rosenthal, and he's been a good friend of mine for 17 years, and I'm looking forward to his challenge to each and every one of us to continue in our journeys to take one more step closer to the cross. Would you welcome Adam with me?
All right, good evening, Connections Church. As Pastor Ray said, my name's Adam Rosenthal. Some of you might recognize me. For a spell of time, my family and I attended church here. From the time that the church moved into this building, it was a no-brainer for us to start coming here because we lived in very close proximity, just north of the park. And I'd known Ray forever. Up until July of 2022, we moved out of the area. So that short season in our lives, we attended here. My youngest son was actually baptized here. So some of you might recognize me. I know some of you. And so some of you might have heard my story already, but I know a lot of you have not. It is pretty much universally agreed by people who do hear my story that the most notable or memorable thing about it is that I was born and raised an observant Jew. So by blood and by upbringing, I am Jewish. I say my blood is Jewish, my DNA is Jewish. I, at one point, wanted to find out how Jewish I really was. My wife, Christy, is really into genealogy and studying her ancestry. And so she sent her DNA away and got back her ancestry report. And she got this really exotic pie chart with all these different slices. And some of the things she thought she was. But then there was all this other stuff in there, too. And I thought, okay, well, now's the time for me to find out exactly how Jewish I am. I want to get my exotic pie chart. So I spit in a tube and I sent it away. And I waited a few weeks and I got back my exotic pie chart. Here it is. No, so I was a bit disappointed when I got this result. I'm not gonna lie. I was very disappointed. Not that I was hoping for some sort of family scandal or anything to discover, but I thought there's got to be something else. Is this all I am? I checked with other Jewish people, and they all had some slice of something. 70s, 80% Jewish. My cousins, I checked with my first cousins who had taken the test, and they were all in like the 99 range. I mean, very Jewish, but nothing 100. I tried to magnify it. That didn't help. There was still no little sliver. There was something else, which that 100 probably was an indication that wasn't going to happen. But and scientifically speaking, if my parents and sister took this test, which they haven't yet, they would have to get the same results. So that means that I am, through both parents, a direct descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Levi. I'm a Levite. And it's interesting because Jewish people have existed for 3,800 years, and a lot of people have tried to wipe us out. But here I stand in the year of our Lord, 2024, with an uninterrupted bloodline all the way back to those biblical patriarchs. I guess there's not too many of me walking around. And also this apparently means my parents are distant cousins, so that's awesome and gross. So anyway, that's how I was. That's my blood, and that's how I was raised. Now I will talk to you a minute about my upbringing and how I was raised. But I guess first I'll pose a question to you. Why have me here tonight? Why have some Jewish guy here on Good Friday? Easter's the most important event in human history, and Good Friday is the second most important event in human history. So I have some guy who's Jewish, 100% Jewish, come here and talk to us tonight. Well, you've been in a sermon series, I followed along with it, where you took the ascent to Jerusalem, right? That rings a bell to everyone who goes to church here. You literally took the climb to Jerusalem, and Pastor Ray explained that that's kind of a climb in two senses, right? It's the literal climb, where you're moving through Israel, and Israel is a city on a hill, so you have the Tyropean and the Kidron and the Hinnom Valley, and it's up on the hill, and then you get up into Jerusalem, and you have the Temple Mount, and you go up the Temple Mount, and then there's these steps that go up into the courtyard. They're called the teaching steps, and Jesus was there, by the way, and they're still there, so it's one of the few places on earth today that you can go to. You know Jesus walked there. And they'd sing the Psalms of Ascension on the way. That rings a bell, right? Psalm 120 to 134. And then you get to those 15 teaching steps, and you'd say all of them again, one per step. And you'd get up into the courtyard, and then you'll even higher into the temple. And then even the highest place was the Holy of Holies. And you were literally in the highest place in the entire region. So it was a literal ascent to Jerusalem, but it was also like a symbolic ascent in holiness, right? As you got closer and closer to God. Well, the reason I'm here tonight as an Israelite is to tell you about the third ascent. Yeah, there's a third one. And Israelites didn't take it as a group together traveling. It's up to each individual to take this particular ascent. And like those other two ascents, they ended within the walls of the city of Jerusalem, right? This one's a little bit different because it starts just outside those walls at a wooden cross that was placed in the ground on this day over 2,000 years ago. And it's a journey that this Israelite took. So let me start at the beginning for you with my story. So as I told you, I was born and raised in an observant Jewish home. And much of my youth was spent in strict Hebrew and Jewish religious training. I quickly in my life became literate in Hebrew. I can read it and write it. I don't even remember learning that. It's just something I've always known how to do. I studied the Torah, the Talmud, the Tanakh. I had a bar mitzvah, and I was top of my class, so I was very studious. So yeah, that was me in my youth, and I made every attempt to follow the Jewish law because that's what we did, just like you read about in the Old Testament. This was the same for me, just later, more modernized, right? So that was my life, following the Jewish law, and I was content in that I didn't know any other life. I mean, I knew people were different from me, but this was how I lived, and it was fine. Where I ran into trouble, or I guess I should say the first sign of spiritual descent for me, was when I was like 16-ish. I could drive. I had a job. I wasn't always under my parents' purview at that point. So I guess you could say I was more responsible, or maybe not more responsible, just more independent, because I was never very responsible. And something occurred to me in an epiphany. It hit me like a brick, and it was very alarming to me. I realized that I wasn't good at following the Jewish law. I thought that I was. I really did, but I realized I wasn't, because it came to my attention that there were several. There were 613 of them, and there were several that I had not known about, because I didn't know that number, and I didn't know how many laws I was actually supposed to be following. So I realized I wasn't doing as good a job as I thought, and then that caused me to be more introspective and really have to admit to myself that even the ones I was trying to follow, I wasn't perfect at. So why was that so problematic for me? Well, because of Deuteronomy 27:26, a verse I knew very well from the Torah, that basically tells any Jewish person that if you ever mess any of this up, you're done for. Like, that's the end. No more chances for you. You've messed it up. You ruined your one chance. You can't run it back. You can't rewind it. You'll never fix it. You're done for. Your opportunity to please God is over. So what was I supposed to do with that at age 16? It's like if I told you I would give you like $1 million. It doesn't matter what the money is. I say I told you I'd give you $1 billion if you could count to 100 flawlessly, and you messed it up at 16. Ask yourself honestly, would you keep counting? No, why? Why would you keep counting? And I didn't, but it wasn't counting for me. It was the Jewish law. So I started throwing it away because what was the point anymore? So there was all that ceremonial stuff. Don't mix fibers and do this on the Sabbath. And I wasn't going to do that anymore. I didn't like it. And then there was the dietary law. I mean, come on. Everything you guys were eating looked delicious. So I mean, that was another one I had to throw out right away. So it was the ceremonial stuff. But the problem you need to understand is that for me, the Jewish law for every Jewish person, it wasn't just ceremonial stuff. It was my moral compass. It was where I got moral and ethical. It was how I knew how to live as a decent person. But it was a slippery slope, and I didn't distinguish between the two. And I'm not even sure at that age I even understood how. It was just all stuff I was supposed to do. So no, I'm not going to light the candles on Sabbath. And no, I'm not going to avoid pork. And no, I'm not going to love my neighbor. Whoops, right? It goes downhill really fast. And suddenly, in my desire to get rid of all of that stuff from my life, because I was angry at it, plus my life wasn't going great at the time. It's not like I was the most popular kid in school. So I was just angry, and I didn't want to do that stuff anymore because I was a failure. So I threw it out. And I got to the point where I was, rude, inconsiderate, mean. I didn't care. In my mind, all I was doing was violating the Jewish law, which I had done already anyway. So what was the point? At the same time, not only was I disenfranchised with the faith that I was raised in, I had a simmering hatred for the church, for Christianity, for all of you. I couldn't stand you. I was evangelized to a lot, probably because I didn't behave like someone who knew Jesus. Plus, people can tell that I'm Jewish by looking at me, and for the smart evangelist, they know that's someone who doesn't know Jesus. So I got evangelized to a lot, and I developed a pretty good routine with that. I would be quiet, and I would feign interest, and I would let them give me their materials, and then that's when the explosion would happen. Then I'd rip it up, tear it up, throw it in their face, swear a blue streak, and send them off licking their wounds. And I can honestly tell you that was probably the most joyous experience I ever had at that point. There was nothing that made me happier than that. So that's me, late teens, early 20s. I was a very Saul of Tarsus, very studious Jewish guy, but I wasn't living a godly life, and I definitely did not care for this Christianity thing. I met my wife, Christy, when we were basically both teenagers, and we got married at the age of 23. We're a few months apart, so there's time during the year where we're the same age, if you will. So we married when we were both 23, and that was a great time in our lives. I mean, if you've been a newlywed, that's a great time in your life. And less than 2 years after being married, we bought our first single-family home in Hopkins, Minnesota, and wonderful time in our lives, But that was where I had another existential crisis, because it brought about some negative emotions in me that I was not expecting. Because essentially what happened, believe it or not, is that something about buying that house and moving into it caused me to realize that I had become an adult. It sounds funny, maybe I should have realized it before then. I guess it was something about mowing the lawn and raking the leaves that really nailed that home for me, because my dad wasn't giving me a 20 afterwards. Because it was mine. You'd think, how can you not realize you were a grown-up? But the thing is, when you meet your spouse in your youth, there's no magic line you cross where you both jump over it together and say, we're adults now. So we were, I guess getting married should have been it, or graduating college, but it just wasn't, because we were just doing life together from our youth all the way up to that point. And moving into that house, I realized, oh my goodness, I am an adult. And that was a problem for me, because I always was able to justify my bad behavior based on the fact that I was a kid. I would say that's what kids do. Kids are rude and mean and unkind and selfish and inconsiderate. And what's a kid to do? They look out for number one. Come on, that's what I'm doing. And suddenly, as flawed as that logic is, right, that's not good logic to begin with. So if you're a kid, don't do that. But I realized that was not something I could lean on anymore. And so I was definitely affected by this. It caused me some psychological pain. I was so embarrassed and ashamed and regretful of the way that I had been behaving and leading my life and treating other people. And I couldn't get past it. It wasn't just something that was a passing fancy and I went, shucks, and, pass the salt. It was just something I couldn't get past. I was obsessed with it. I was ruminating on it day and night. It was to the point where I was literally becoming physically sick. And I just couldn't get past the sins of my past. So in addition to that situation kind of playing out as we first moved into that house, I can tell you that Christy and I, my wife and I, we were somewhat socially isolated because we obviously both had friends in our youth, but we grew up fast. We met each other young, we got married young, we bought a house, we were focused on our careers. And some of the people that we knew from our youth, some of the friendships we had, they weren't there yet. They were still living in their basement, their original parents' house. So, they kind of were still kids. So those friendships kind of, faded, and that was okay. So we largely had only each other, and I was totally cool with that, just focusing on my job and, my wife, and I was good with that life. But she still has a close relationship with her mom and her sister. I'm less close with my family, and there was some friction there. But she had one Saturday where she spent the whole day with her sister. And so I was in the midst of this, self-loathing, this regret and this remorse. And then I had the whole day by myself. So it was just a brutal, brutal day because I didn't have 800 TV channels. There was no Netflix or Peacock. And there was no internet the way that we have the internet today. So it was just me. It was just me alone in my house, ruminating on my guilt and my regret. And I felt terrible. I was guilty and lonely. So I decided I needed to find something to do. So I thought, well, here's what'll kill 2 minutes. I'll get the mail. So this was, genius, right? That'll take up some time. But I want you to be able to line up all the coincidences in this story. This was the first time in my entire marriage I ever got the mail, right? I was pretty sure I knew how to do it, but I hadn't done it before. So I'd never gotten the mail. I thought, I'll do that. That'll take some time, and then I'll look through the mail. That will take time too. Because again, that's how bad my mental state was. I was just desperate for anything to do. So in Hopkins, Minnesota, where we lived, they still do it the old-fashioned way, where all the mailboxes are nailed to the house by the front door, and the postal worker walks. So I opened the front door, and I reached my arm around, and I pulled out what was in the mailbox. And something felt sort of heavy, and I thought, it's a magazine or catalog or something. And I scrolled through it, and I saw what was so heavy. Someone who had gotten our names off of a new to the neighborhood list left a Bible in our mailbox. And I still laugh at God's sense of humor. I will forever laugh at God's sense of humor with that situation because it was only a New Testament. Yeah, you don't see those that often. You really don't. But obviously he knew that was what I needed. So my first instinct kicked in, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to kick the door open. I'm going to go out. I'm going to find whoever did this, and I'm going to kick them off my property, right? And there was a part of me, okay, they were gone. I can't kick them off the property. There was a part of me that wished I could find them and bring them back to my house so I could kick them off my property. Then I came back in the house, and I'm like, okay, I'm stuck with it. I can't, throw it at them. So I thought, okay, well, my next instinct is I'm going to go bring it back to the fire pit because I'm accumulating some sticks and some kindling, and I'll just rip up the pages and all that stuff. And like I said in the first service tonight, I for the life of me today still cannot tell you what was going through my head and what made me think what I was thinking in that moment. But for some reason on that day, guilty and lonely, finding that mailbox, that Bible in my mailbox, the first time I ever got the mail in my marriage, I didn't make that decision. I didn't know much about that book I was holding in my hands. I could have named 3 people in it: Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, because they're kind of, pop culture knows who Jesus and his parents are. If you had asked me in that moment to name a 4th person in the New Testament and take a solid guess at it, I legitimately would have guessed Santa Claus. Yeah, Saint Nick sounds religious, Saint Nicholas. But that was how little I knew about that literature I was holding in my hands. But I did know one tiny little thing about it. There was something in there about reconciling your sin and getting a fresh start in life. So there I stood, very, very bored and very guilty. And suddenly I had something to read and something that might placate my guilt. So against every instinct I've ever had in my life, I opened it and I started to read it. You might wonder why Jewish people are so hesitant. Do you know that Hitler quoted the New Testament? Why would a Jew listen to anything you guys have to say? So I always thought you steer clear of that stuff. But I opened it and I started to read it, and suddenly it became a insatiable desire for me. I suddenly felt like I was someone who was so thirsty, and this was the water that I needed, and I couldn't put it down. If I wasn't eating or working or sleeping, I was reading this thing. So I got through the Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. Another night, like 2 weeks later, Christy was gone again, and I kept reading, Acts, and then I got through Romans chapters like 8, 9, 10. So we're going in order here, Romans 8, 9, 10. Which, believe it or not, to my surprise, is a section of the New Testament written for Jews. Who would have thought such a thing, right? I certainly didn't, but I read that. And when I got to that point, like it actually was like to Romans 10, 10, 10, 11. I even know the verses. Suddenly, in a moment, in a nanosecond, like the blink of an eye, it's just like how it says Christ is coming back the second time. Every bit of theology that I had learned in my life that I couldn't make sense of suddenly made sense. Everything that was inadequate and false and was idolatry in my life was lifted away. All the guilt and shame and self-loathing and wondering if I was even loved or anyone cared about me went away. It was like my life was this big jigsaw puzzle with one missing piece, and because of it, the whole picture wasn't visible. And then it got filled in, just like that. And I realized that was the moment I was born for. And in that moment in time, in June 2002, sitting on my green puffy couch in Hopkins, Minnesota, all by myself, I became a believer in Jesus Christ. And I never at any point in that point, it never at any point in my life up to that point had ever had someone successfully evangelize to me, and I had never set foot in a Sunday church service. And I definitely was told to steer clear of all of that stuff, but there I was. So, Christy came home, and I kind of tell her what I was going through mentally and emotionally and spiritually, and she thought a very hot place had frozen over. But I do appreciate what her reaction was, because like I said, she could have said, look, I wasn't interested in being like married to a Bible banger. Like, what is this? This is not what but she was good with it, and it actually drew her back to her own Christian roots. And then shortly thereafter, she became pregnant for the first time. And so that was just an amazing series of events in my life, right? Suddenly I'm like this new Christian thirsty for more, and I'm expecting father. It was so cool. And so we decided, well, this wasn't intentional, but we should, now we inadvertently have kind of developed a unified front, and we can start to raise our child in the church. Although I had never gone to church. I mean, I was barely like ahead of my kid. And so I'm going to go to church. So we went, the very first Sunday church service I ever went to, very first sermon I ever heard was called A Healthy Christian Attitude About Uncertainty. And I thought, what a good sermon. Great advice, great counsel, great strength for people who have uncertainty in their lives. But for the first time ever, I felt like I didn't have uncertainty in my life. And that feeling only lasted for 48 more hours. And then the Tuesday after that Sunday, Christy had her first ultrasound, and we got some concerning results. And I do want to tell you that 6 weeks later, further testing alleviated those concerns. But in the intervening 6 weeks, that was the most uncertainty I'd ever faced in my entire life. It was so terrible. But at the same time, I was able to take a step back and go, okay, but God knew that this was coming in my future. And what did he do? He guided me to the right church on the right day to hear the counsel and wisdom and get the strength that I needed for the exact situation I was going to be in. It was amazing to me. And so even in that intervening 6 weeks where we didn't know what was going to happen, I was baptized. And because I just felt like God was now so actively working in my life. It was so clear. So we got the additional test results 6 weeks later, and everything turned out okay. And a few months later, my daughter Savannah was born. She's going to be 21 now. She's at Northwestern University. And I was content with my faith story ending there. I never wanted to be seen or heard. I never needed people looking at me like you guys are now, or hearing me like you are now. But apparently, some people find my story interesting. And also, I found out it to be very much the case that my upbringing, being very educated in Jewish laws and customs and literate in Hebrew, has immensely helped in studying the Bible, both for myself and for other people. So I have spent the last 20 plus years teaching and preaching and speaking. Never ever the path I would have at one time chosen for myself. Certainly wouldn't have ever in a million years predicted it, that God, had me go through all that rigorous Jewish and Hebrew training for 12 years so that I could eventually be teaching in a church. But that's how it went. And I still am kind of in awe, and taken aback at the fact that, again, 3,800 years of uninterrupted bloodline, which I'm fairly confident none of them ever had any interest in Jesus Christ. But in 1975, God from on high, looked down at me in my little bassinet in Methodist Hospital and said, yeah, that one. And I don't know why. I'm grateful for it. But I told you that I was going to show you the third ascent, and I will on a subsequent slide. But first, before I can show you how I rose up, I have to show you how I fell down. So this was This was my life. You know, these steps down were all of the falls that I sort of took. But the thing that's crazy is it's all in the Bible. It's all predicted. My whole life was prophesied, and I didn't know it. So I found out I'm Jewish. Yay, I'm holy, special, yay, for me. God set us aside to be a holy people. That's great, love that. But he gave us a law to follow. Okay, well, I guess that's okay. If I want to be a special people, I guess it's not so bad to have some rules. Okay, he's going to judge us in our adherence to his law. Okay, I'm not a fan of that, but I guess if you're going to give us rules to follow, we probably should be judged on whether we do a good job. Otherwise, what's the point of rules? There's that Deuteronomy 27:26 that I knew well. Those who did not follow his law will be separated. Uh-oh. And then I come to the realization at the tender age of 16, I didn't follow his law, and I failed. And for a Jewish person who's trying to evolve spiritually and truly cares about a relationship with God, it doesn't go any further than that. But there was no place left for me to go. I'm in the bottom. I'm in the pit. I have failed. That was my spiritual and emotional descent. And the funny thing is, like I said, that was my life. That's every Jewish person's life. And the reality of it is it's already documented in advance for Jewish people who are to be born. This will be your path. Why did God have us do that? Well, we're the chosen people, right? You ever wonder what we're chosen for? Minnesota, we're the frozen chosen. It wasn't chosen because he likes us best. We're chosen to be a representative example for you so that you recognize my struggle, the fact that it was not only documented, but documented in advance, and realize that even if you're not given the same laws to follow, whatever ethical or moral standards you were given, you're in the same pit with me. It's just documented better for me so that you could see yourself in my struggle. So I have failed. Those are the three words that I end on. But here's the beauty of the situation. I want you to look at those three words on the next slide, because I told you there's going to be a third ascent, and here it is. You see, I have failed. It's not the end. When you are a Christian and you want to live the Christian life, it's the beginning. Everyone starts with I have failed and the realization that you have failed. This ascent is possible, this third ascent, this ascent in my life, and anyone who chooses to take it is because of the cross that was put in the ground today. Jesus built this bridge back to the holiness of God so we can have true spiritual ascent when he died on that cross. Yes, I have failed, but that's just the beginning, because then I realized, yes, I have failed, but all these New Testament verses tell me that everyone has. And yes, God is a God of justice, so when there's crime, there's got to be punishment. Okay, it's like the movie National Treasure. I'd really like to not go to prison. Someone's got to go to prison, okay? I'd really like to not spend eternity in hell. I'd really like to not be separated from God, but I messed up. But what's this? The God of the universe loves me enough that rather than taking that wrath out on me and crushing me for all eternity, he took it out on his own son so that I could escape unscathed. Now, biblically, again, this is all backed up by biblical verses. All he asks for in return is our hearts. What does that mean? Our acknowledgement, our love. Yeah, great. I'm more than willing. How do I do that? How do I give God my heart? Well, there's that verse that turned me in the blink of an eye. Romans 10:10. We give God our hearts by believing. Just say yes. I believed, and in that moment on my house, in my couch in Hopkins, I received eternal life, joy, and peace. I knew I had value. I knew that I had an irrevocable, non-transferable ticket to heaven, no matter what I had done or what I would accidentally do in the future. That's what Jesus offers. He said, I took it all away. Just say yes, and you'll be with God forever, and you can live the rest of your life here on earth as the person you're supposed to be. So this isn't just an ascent for Jewish people, right? Yeah, I took that fall, but it was so you could see that everyone does. But everyone can take this ascent back up in the blink of an eye like I did. I don't want anyone here to leave tonight without being at the top of that staircase. And notice the blue arrow, it keeps getting higher and higher. It just goes higher and higher. 20 plus years since I went up that staircase, and I'm still getting higher spiritually. And my life isn't perfect, right? I didn't suddenly become healthy and wealthy and wise. But I do know that I have the joy of heaven to look forward to, and I do know that no matter what I go through in life, God is with me and giving me strength and wisdom. So I'm going to pray for us now, and I want my words to be your words. I'm going to pray our way up this staircase, that final ascent, the one that really matters. If you've said these words before in your own head, in your own heart, great. God loves to hear it again. If you have never committed these words to God before because you never had these thoughts, but you're having them now for the first time, I got great news for you. This is your moment. You're about to step from death into life. life everlasting in heaven. So pray with me now, if you would, please. Dear Lord, I realize that I have failed. It was a harsh realization. And I understand now from what your word and your wisdom, because I couldn't have figured it out on my own, that my corruption, my corrupt heart is a symptom of the species that I am. Not because you made me this way, because I chose to be, because everybody does. But you, before time began, had a solution, because even though you knew I would deserve punishment, you didn't want to do it because you love me. And that's overwhelming. Why would the God of the universe stoop down so low, swing so low to love me? But you do, and you've promised it. And I'm so grateful for the fact that you bore my pain and my shame and my punishment on that cross so I could escape the chains of death and hell, and I can start marching towards heaven. I know that all you ask for is my heart, and I give you my heart by believing. And so I'm going to tell you right now, God, yes. I say yes to you, Jesus. I believe in you. And I know that because of that, and I've committed my heart to you today, that the rest of my life here on earth will be different because you've relieved my burden and made me free to be the person I can be, loving and kind, and you've stamped my ticket to eternal life. I just thank you so much for the cross today, Lord Jesus, for what you did, and I'm thankful that we all get to celebrate together for your final victory on Sunday. In your matchless name, Lord Jesus, amen. And I just want to say this, that Tim already mentioned the cards. If you really found yourself agreeing with this stuff for the first time, just check the box on the card that says, I'm interested in becoming a follower of Jesus Christ. Put the card in the box, and someone here will just tell you what your next step is now that you're standing up there and you have a whole new life and you're a new creation. So thanks a lot, guys.